I'm Evan Carter, 31 years old, and I work as a junior analyst at a tech startup in Des Moines, Iowa. When I tell people I grew up in a perfect suburban home, they picture basketball hoops, family barbecues, and Sunday dinners. But behind the fresh paint and manicured lawn, I was the kid who never quite fit. I arrived at the Carter house as an infant handed to Mark and Linda Carter by a social worker whose eyes betrayed no warmth. They already had 2 children, Owen now 29 and Claire 24, and from day one, I was the bonus child, the obligation. My dark hair and hazel eyes clashed with their blonde, blue-eyed brood. At holiday photo ops, Mark and Linda would introduce Owen and Claire with pride, then shrug and say, "And this is Evan." No sun, no sparkle in their eyes, just a neutral nod. School felt like safe ground. I became the kid with perfect grades the kid teachers praised. I brought home awards and honorable mentions that filled our fridge. I kept my room spotless, helped wash dishes, and learned to fold laundry just so. But at home, I was still the passenger in the family photo, the guest at my own birthday parties. I remember Claire's 16th birthday. She got an expensive gift from Mom and Dad, while my handmade bracelet went straight into the trash. I found it later scraped clean of glitter folded in a corner. That was the last time I tried to be family. My only refuge was my grandfather, Jack Carter, who lived 2 hours away on a weathered farm outside Council Bluffs, Iowa. Every summer, I'd escape the silent house and roar of resentment to help Grandpa fix tractors, plant corn, and learn folk songs on his creaky porch swing. He called me champ, or kiddo never obligation. His hand-me-down guitar smelled of motor oil and sagebrush, and his eyes always shone when he saw me. One summer evening, as we watched gold light spill over the fields, I asked Grandpa, "Why do they treat me like a stranger?" He squeezed my shoulder and said, "Because they never learned how to see you. But you're worth more than their blind hearts can measure." Those words lit a spark in me, a promise that I would prove my worth on my own terms. At 18, I won a full scholarship to Iowa State University, a chance to finally step beyond the Carter suburban stage. As I packed my bags, Mark offered a flat. "Good luck, Evan," while Linda merely nodded. The family photo on their living room wall would stay unchanged, me absent smiling from a distance. I still remember the morning I unpacked my last box in Ames, Iowa sunlight, slipping through the high dorm window like a promise. Freshman year buzzed around me, with electric energy students rushing to lectures, impromptu jam sessions in the quad, and the murmur of ambition echoing in every hallway. I'd shed Evan the outsider like an old skin and rebuilt myself as Evan the scholar, determined to forge a life beyond the Carter shadows. My roommate Malik was a clever theater major with a penchant for quoting Shakespeare at 3 a.m. And across the hall lived Serena, a political science whiz who believed she could change the world before graduation. I felt at home for the first time, untethered from the cold indifference of my childhood. But freedom carried its own risks. One afternoon, I found a letter waiting on my desk. Its envelope stained with tears or rain, I couldn't tell which. My name was embossed in a shaky script that felt both familiar and distant. Inside, a single line read, "We need to talk about the farm." I tucked the letter into my pocket, heart thudding, and wondered what ghosts from my summers with Grandpa were stirring in my past. That semester, I plunged into campus life with reckless enthusiasm. I joined the debate team, rallied at environmental protests, and even tried out for the intramural soccer squad, mostly to prove I could belong. Yet every night as Malik's laughter drifted through the thin walls, I wrestled with doubts. Was I here to find community, or simply to outrun the memory of betrayal that clung to me like a shadow? The campus library became my refuge, rows of ancient texts whispering comfort. Until one evening, I noticed a poster, Climate Action's sit-in admin building, a chance to stand up for something bigger than grades, bigger than myself. The risk was electrifying, trespassing, possible suspension, maybe even expulsion. Still, I told Serena I was in. That night, under moonlight draped over brick, we joined dozens of students chaining themselves to the entrance doors, chanting until security arrived. My hands shook as officers led me away, but I felt more alive than ever, like I'd carved my own place in the world. Then, as I sat cuffed on the curb, I remembered the letter burning in my pocket, reminding me that some doors, but not all, could be forced open. The fallout from the sit-in was swift. I faced a disciplinary hearing that loomed over my grades like a storm cloud. Professors I'd impressed turned polite and distant. Friends whispered about my reckless streak. Inside the stark hearing room, the dean's gaze was clinical as he asked why I'd risk my scholarship and scholarship committee approval to crash the administration's sacred halls. I spoke of injustice of future generations, quoting lines from environmental treaties, but inside my voice quivered with fear. What if I lost everything I'd worked for? The crestfallen look on Grandpa Jack's face when I called him afterward haunted me more than any threat of expulsion. I paced my dorm room, fists clenched at my chest, torn between the safety of silence and the power of standing by my convictions. The world beyond campus demanded courage. I felt I had to choose succeed alone or risk it all to stay true to myself and to keep uncovering the truths that letter hinted at. A week later, during a lonely lunch in the cavernous student union, I got another letter. This one a fat manila envelope stamped from a small accounting office in Council Bluffs. Inside, I found bank statements detailing the Carter family's finances, showing foreclosure notices and legal fees tied to the old farm. My foster parents were losing the only home that ever felt real to me. My chest tightened as I studied the numbers: unpaid property taxes, mounting debt, the farm itself at risk of auction. How could I feel anger toward the Carters when they'd once given me a roof? And yet anger flickered hotter than grief because they'd abandoned me in search of profit, just as they'd abandoned Grandpa when the mortgage became too heavy. I clutched the statements, vision blurring, and realized I faced a choice: stay on campus and fight for my future, or return to that battered farmhouse that held my happiest memories and maybe something I'd lost closure. The ticking clock on my scholarship loomed, but the hum of an old tractor engine haunted my ears, urging me home. I booked a weekend trip back to Council Bluffs, heart pounding as the interstate ribboned beneath my tires. Driving past fast food joints and strip malls, I rehearsed apologies and regrets, ready to confront Linda and Mark with these documents. But when I crested the hill to Grandpa's farm, I found the gate chained and the field's unkempt cornstalks browning at the edges. A single rose bush near the porch bore only one wilted bloom, its petals gray at the edges, a symbol of neglect and lingering hope. I rang the doorbell of the Carter mansion instead, stepping onto squeaky floorboards I hadn't heard in years. Inside, Owen and Claire lounged among dusty portraits, their eyes flicking to me with thinly veiled disdain. I placed the bank statements on the mahogany table and said, "Someone has to face what happens when you only value land for what it makes you." Their silence was loud enough to crack glass, and just then on the windowsill, I spied a family photo with my face crossed out in thick marker, reminding me I didn't belong there anymore if I ever had. Back in Ames, I cleared my schedule to volunteer at a local food bank run by a nonprofit that fought hunger in rural Iowa. Sorting cans of corn and beans, I saw the faces of hardworking families, too proud to ask for help, the same faces that lined up at soup kitchens in Omaha. Their dignity amidst struggle struck a chord in me, the same chord that Grandpa's farm had once tuned. I felt connected to something larger, the belief that no one should be discarded because of circumstances beyond their control. But at night, I wrestled with a new conflict. An alumni newsletter had featured a glowing write-up on me as a campus leader, praising my activism and quoting my speeches without mentioning the hearing or the fallout. I chastised myself for letting vanity seep in. Was I pursuing justice or merely chasing recognition to fill the void my childhood left? The newsletter's glossy photo of me in a suit felt like a mask, and I wondered if my fight for authenticity was turning into the same performance I'd once despised. Then the twist came. An unsigned note slid under my dorm door. "Mom wants to see you. This can't wait." No signature, no clue, but carrying the weight of every unanswered question I had. My fingers shook as I touched the words. Memories of Linda's cold lectures and Mark's distracted nods surging up. Could it be from Grandma Lorraine, my birth mother, who I'd only ever heard about in whispered stories? Or was it from someone in the Carter household finally acknowledging me? I felt the urge to tear it up, to ignore another summons that might only reopen old wounds. Yet a quiet resolve settled in my bones. I wouldn't duck away again. I slipped on my coat and headed toward the campus exit. heart thundering with equal parts dread and determination. The letter of invitation in my pocket was a key to a door I'd long feared to open. That same evening, beneath neon lights of a campus coffee shop, I met the note's sender, Ms. Rosa Bennett, an elder I vaguely remembered from my summer days with Grandpa. She'd once helped me tend his garden and told me secrets of soil and growth. Her hair was silver, her eyes sharp as tacks. She pushed a manila folder across the table. Inside were faded journal pages, written in my grandmother's hand, detailing her flight from a wealthy Chicago clan after refusing an arranged marriage, and the fear that her father would reclaim me to erase her shame. She'd entrusted Grandpa with my care, believing he'd protect me, but she never imagined what that protection would cost me. My breath caught as I traced her neat script, each word revealing a sacrifice that spanned decades. If her story was true, then every feeling of abandonment I'd ever had was tangled in layers of love and fear I couldn't yet unravel. I closed the journal, head spinning, with questions that demanded answers I wasn't sure I wanted. The next morning, I found myself at a crossroads, literally. Iowa State's campus sat to my left, the future I'd fought for. To my right, the highway stretching back to Council Bluffs, and a past refusing to stay buried. I stood beside the Welcome to Ames sign, suitcase in hand, as students buzzed past, oblivious to the storm inside me. I felt the weight of every identity orphan, outsider, activist, scholar. Which one defined me? I thought of Grandpa's voice. You're worth more than what they make you believe. And I realized that while I couldn't change the past, I could decide how it shaped me. With a deep breath, I turned toward home, steeling myself for the confrontation ahead, ready to risk everything for the sake of truth and a chance at belonging. But when I reached the farmhouse, the front door was ajar, and inside the smell of fresh paint mingled with damp wood. Someone had been here. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stepped across the threshold, unsure whether I'd find redemption. I pushed through the door into the dim, empty kitchen where the morning light slanted across bare walls. The old linoleum floor was scuffed, and the table lay overturned, its legs splintered like a memory shattered by time. I called out, "Grandpa!" My voice sounded foreign in the vast silence. Then, from the living room, I heard a faint humming. Following the sound, I found a figure hunched over the piano, a black upright my grandfather used to play. The man paused, fingers hovering above the keys, Owen Carter. His face was gaunt, guilt raw in his green eyes. He whispered, "Evan, I had to come." He rose, dust motes dancing around him. "They told me you left for college and never looked back. But when I heard they were auctioning the farm, I knew I had to tell you the truth. I'm dying." A cold dread shot through me as he dropped into a chair, clutching his side. "I don't have long. You deserve to know why they abandoned you, why they hid everything." His confession trembled in the air, setting in motion revelations that would change everything, and demanding that I follow the final strands of my story to a conclusion I'd never imagined. And so, with my heart pounding and the piano's last note hanging between us, I realized the path forward would demand more courage than any protest or scholarship hearing. I had to face Owen's dying words, unearth the deepest Carter secrets, and decide whether forgiveness or vengeance would guide me into the life I truly belonged to. My next step would pull every thread together, and I knew I couldn't turn back now. The story was far from over. It was only just beginning. I stood in the dim light of the farmhouse living room, my heart hammering against my ribs as Owen Carter slumped forward, clutching his side. The old piano's broken pedal poked at my shin, a silent metronome to the chaos unfolding. The scent of fresh paint and damp timber hung heavy in the air, a dissonant counterpoint to Owen's ragged breathing. I swallowed hard, my mind racing back to every time I'd felt invisible in that house, every unnoticed birthday, every discarded gift, every snide remark that bit into my confidence. Now here was Owen, the biological son, dying on this same floor, begging me to hear secrets he'd hidden for decades. My chest tightened. I forced myself to kneel beside him, my hands hovering uncertainly over his trembling shoulders. If I didn't act, if I didn't get him help, he might slip away before I uncovered the truth he promised. Across the room, the piano's keys gleamed dully, each one worn from Grandpa's calloused fingers. Music had once been a bridge between us, Now those keys felt like a gauntlet thrown down at my feet. A single tear traced its way down Owen's cheek. "They made me keep it hidden," he whispered, voice rasping. "Promise me you'll find her." His green eyes flickered with desperation, and I realized that saving Owen meant diving headfirst into the Carter family's buried history, no matter how dangerous. I nodded, though my throat felt raw, and braced myself for the first of his revelations about the night I was brought here, about what really happened to Mama Lorraine, and why the Carters feared the truth like a plague. As Owen's breathing hitched, I steeled my resolve to honor Grandpa's promise to finally claim my story, even if I lost Owen in the process. We wheeled Owen into the stark fluorescent lights of the small Council Bluffs Hospital emergency room, the plastic chair scraping on linoleum as I settled next to him. He lay back on the thin mattress, pale as the cotton hospital gown hugging his frame, and I saw Grandpa's eyes in his hollow cheeks, those same wrinkles that had crinkled with laughter as he taught me folk tunes. Around us, nurses bustled by with whispered urgency, and the room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Owen reached out a trembling hand, and I took at every flicker of his skin beneath my fingertips, spurring me onward. As the doctor gave him something dulling, I leaned in, voice low. "Tell me," I urged. He coughed once, a brittle, painful sound, and then began. "It wasn't just the farm taxes or their pride that drove them to lie. On the night you arrived, Mama Lorraine, your birth grandmother, came to the house in the dead of winter, clutching a leather satchel. She believed you had a right to know who she was." His words struck me like a lightning bolt. Lorraine had never been just a distant figure. She'd risked everything to set me on the path to discovery. I remembered her stories, snatches of a southern drawl, hints of a Willamette Valley childhood, melodies of gospel songs she sang softly by the fire. Owen's gaze sharpened, but something happened. "Dad and Mom found that satchel," he said, voice thick with shame. "They tore it open, saw the letter she wrote, and decided your truth was too dangerous to them and to the family's reputation. They convinced Mama to leave and never speak your name again. They erased her from your life, Evan. They erased you." My breath caught. The thought that they'd destroyed the one lifeline I'd longed for, a piece of my birth mother's voice, made my insides twist. Grandpa's lessons about worth and love clashed with the Carters' obsession with image and control, leaving me torn between inherited loyalty and righteous anger. Owen drifted in and out of sleep as the medication took hold, and I realized that to follow his story meant exposing decades of concealment, risking the Carters' wrath, and perhaps even more terrifying, discovering that some truths might be too painful to embrace. Oh, but I couldn't turn back now. The following morning, sunlight slanted across the hospital window in sharp beams, illuminating drifting dust motes in the air, as I poured stale coffee from a battered thermos into a paper cup. Grandpa sat beside me, arms crossed, jaw clenched. The doctor had said Owen's condition was serious, but stable for now. I sipped the bitter brew and thought about the leather satchel Owen had described, how heavy it must have felt in Mama's hands that night, filled with letters, photos, and maybe even a recording of her voice. I pictured her standing in the snow coat collar turned up against the cold eyes, determined. That image aroused something fierce within me, a promise to retrieve every piece of her story, no matter where it lay hidden. Yet a question hung between us like a ghost. Where had Mama gone after she left that farmhouse? Grandpa stirred his tea, gaze distant. "She headed west," he said softly. "To Oregon." She cut herself off, believed starting over meant disappearing completely. His words felt like shards in my chest. Disappearing. How could someone who loved so deeply vanish without a trace? The Carters may have claimed she was irresponsible, but what would drive a grandmother to surrender her own grandchild and vanish into thin air? Something about that choice felt like a mirror to my own struggle. Could I truly vanish into a new identity? Or was I forever bound to the past that refused to die? Grandpa's knuckles whitened as he gripped his mug. "We'll have to find her," he said, voice resolute. And in that moment, I felt the swell of a new purpose to scour public records, trace every step Mama took, and confront the Carters, Owen, Mark, Linda, and even Claire, to unravel the tangled web of lies. But to do that, I'd have to navigate legal hurdles, family loyalty, and my own fears. The farm's legacy had always been a symbol of stability, Now it felt like quicksand. Clutching my coffee cup, I realized there was no turning back from the quest to unearth my grandmother's path. Back in the Carter mansion, the air was stale and heavy with unspoken tensions when I returned with Grandpa to collect Mama's belongings that Owen had hidden in a musty attic chest. The door creaked as we stepped inside, revealing decades of family artifacts, portraits of stern ancestors, dusty porcelain figurines, and half-forgotten trophies. I unearthed a chipped wooden box engraved with Lorraine W. I. Bennett in delicate script. Inside lay a bundle of letters, tied with a faded green ribbon, a single pressed violet, and a battered tape recorder. My fingers trembled as I lifted the ribbon. The violet's purple petals still vibrant proof that beauty can endure even when buried under layers of neglect. I untied it, heart racing, and unfolded the top letter. The handwriting was small and precise. My dearest grandchild, if you are reading this, then my promise has held true. I cannot bear to watch you grow in a house that fears truth more than love. The words hit me like a tidal wave, flooding me with warmth and sorrow. I pressed the tape recorder's button. Static hissed, then Mama's voice. "Evan, you are the melody in my silence." Her tone was soft, trembling with emotion, but every syllable was crystal clear. A lifeline cast across decades of deception. I staggered back, tears blurring my vision as I listened to her describe her hopes and fears, her heartbreak at leaving, and her unwavering love. Grandpa's shoulder pressed into mine, and I realized I'd uncovered something sacred and fragile, the proof that I'd never been unwanted, only protected by a promise that became a prison. The Carters had kept these treasures hidden to maintain their facade, but now I held the key to shatter it. My pulse thundered. With these letters and recordings, I could demand the truth, force them to face their betrayal, or I could choose to guard Mama's wish for peace. The weight of that choice pressed down on me like a storm cloud ready to break. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, the box of Mama's possessions beside me, and replayed her voice in my mind. The recorder's static crackled in the darkness as I imagined Mark and Linda's justification. They'd called themselves respectable, upstanding pillars of the community, but at what cost? Erasing a grandmother and abandoning a granddaughter were crimes of the heart, wrapped in the camouflage of social reputation. My own beliefs clashed. Did I value loyalty and forgiveness, or honesty and justice? Above all, I thought of my college protests, of chaining myself to doors and chanting for change, and realized my fight for environmental justice paled before the personal revolution I now faced. If I exposed the Carters, I risked destroying the only family I'd ever known. If I stayed silent, I'd betray Mama's legacy and my own truth. I pressed my palm to the violet's brittle petals, their purple hue reminding me of resilience and hardship. At dawn, I'd confront them with these letters recordings and the weight of their crimes. But as moonlight filtered through the attic window, it brought a final doubt. Could I stand firm if they denied everything, or would I falter, wanting to cling to the comfort of familiarity? I clenched the ribbon in my hand, preparing for the confrontation that would decide whether I reclaimed my identity or surrendered to the Carter silence once more. At sunrise, I returned to the Carter house's front hall, Mama's box tucked under my arm. Mark stood by the staircase, his face a mask of polite surprise. Linda hovered nearby, eyes flicking to my hands. Owen lay back in the hospital, fragile as a candle flame, unable to bear witness. I inhaled, feeling the strain of every moment I'd ever lived under their roof. In a voice steadier than I felt, I began, "You owe me the truth." I laid the letters and recorder on the hallway table. Their veneer cracked visibly. Linda's lips quivered. Mark's jaw clenched. The letters were unassailable evidence of Mama's sacrifice. The recorder's hiss brought her voice into their living room like a ghost demanding justice. Claire appeared at the top of the stairs, phone in hand, recording us. Even she sensed the gravity. I pressed play. Mama's words filled the hall, each syllable echoing off the walls they'd built to cage me. As the final note faded, silence crashed down. I met Mark's eyes, saw the lie in his throat, and knew there was no going back. "This ends now," I said, "or I walk away forever." Their stunned expressions were the calm before the storm of reckonings to come, and the moment when my own voice at last taught me what true strength meant. The corridor felt impossibly long as I walked away from the Carter mansion, Mama's recorder heavy in my coat pocket. Behind me, I could hear muffled voices, Mark's barked denials, Linda's sobbing confessions, Claire's stunned silence. I didn't look back. With every step, I felt the weight of 29 years lift from my shoulders, replaced by a fiercer resolve. I'd laid bare their greatest secret, stripped away the facade of respectability they'd maintained, at the expense of truth and love. Outside, a lone cardinal flitted across the gray sky, its crimson feathers a vivid testament that beauty and resilience can blaze through the bleakest winters. I paused at the gate, letting that bright flash of color steal my nerves. I was no longer the boy who craved their approval. I was the man who owned his story. Yet as I unlocked my car door, I realized that exposing them was only the beginning. Now I had to decide what to do with the proof, and whether justice demanded I share it with the world. My phone buzzed with a news alert: local activist uncovers Carter family scandal. My heart lurched. Someone Claire no doubt had leaked Mama's recording and letters to a community newsletter. In minutes, the story would spread across social media, the Carters' pillars of suburban virtue exposed as custodians of cruelty. I felt a surge of vindication tempered by guilt. I'd wanted closure, not to watch them burn. But silence felt complicit, and the public deserved to know how a family built on social standing could erode a child's sense of self. I tapped the notification, my finger hesitating over the share icon. If I amplified the story, I risked a lawsuit, or worse, being branded a sensationalist. Yet if I stayed silent, Mama's sacrifice would be buried again beneath their privileged lies. The hum of my car engine echoed in my ears as I realized that every act of truth carries its own danger, and I hadn't yet decided which peril I was willing to face. The moment I hit post, my phone erupted. Comments streamed in outrage, praise, disbelief. Local reporters called their voices crackling with excitement. A friend texted, "This is huge, want to do an interview?" But I sat frozen behind the steering wheel, furious at myself for handing over control. I reached for the recorder, clutching its cold metal like a lifeline. Mama's voice, clear as dawn, reminded me why I'd started this journey. "You deserve to know who you are." I turned the car toward the hospital each mile, reminding me that my fight for identity couldn't eclipse my responsibility to Owen. I needed to hear his voice one more time before social media's glare consumed both our families. The city skyline came into view, its steel towers rising like silent sentinels, symbols of progress and peril. As I drove through the golden afternoon light, I braced myself for the reckonings ahead, with Owen's fate, with the Carters' crumbling empire, and with a public that might question my motives as much as applaud my courage. Owen was awake when I arrived, his green eyes bright with fever and defiance. He squeezed my hand, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You did right," he rasped, voice soft as autumn leaves underfoot. Monitors beeped steadily. A nurse hovered just outside the curtain, respect and worry mingling in her gaze. I pressed Mama's recorder into Owen's trembling grasp. "Play it," I urged. He clicked the switch, and her gentle farewell washed over us. For a moment, the room felt sacred, 3 generations bound by love and loss, echoing across decades. When the recording ended, Owen's smile faltered. "This was my mother's last gift," he said quietly. "Promise me you'll find her." His words carried the weight of his failing heart and renewed my sense of purpose. Outside, thunder rumbled, a storm gathering beyond the glass. I realized that chasing Mama's trail meant risking my scholarship if I missed finals, jeopardizing my activism. If I abandoned the conversation I'd started online and facing the Carters' broken wrath on national news. But hearing Owen's plea left me no choice. I would journey to Oregon, come rain or shine. That evening, back in my dorm room, I spread Mama's letters and photographs across my desk. A faded snapshot showed her laughing hair windblown in a Portland park. Another captured her standing proud outside the University of Oregon diploma in hand. Her handwriting trailed across a yellowed page. "I built a life so I could come back to you once I was strong enough. I'm waiting." Each word glowed with hope, a torch guiding me west. I opened my laptop and booked a bus ticket to Portland for the weekend after finals, a gamble with grades, and my standing on campus. The debate club's upcoming tournament and the nonprofit's fundraising gala both fell on the same weekend. Missing them meant burning bridges I'd fought to build. But dragging final exams out of my head felt as foolish as staying anchored to the Carter's toxic roots. By dawn, I'd informed my professors, I'd consult remotely, shared my activism updates, and packed a single duffel bag with essentials, and with symbols of my past and future, Mama's pressed violet grandpa's dog-eared folk songbook, and Owen's worn hospital blanket. As the first rays of sun tinted the sky lilac, I realized this trip would be my leap into adulthood, a journey to claim a legacy knowing I couldn't turn back. On the gray morning of my departure, I stood at the bus station, the air holding the tang of rain. Strangers bustled past each, lost in their own rhythms, while I clutched the recorder like a compass pointing me toward Mama. I felt fear coil in my stomach. Fear of rejection if she'd moved on. Fear of discovering that my idealized mother was flawed. Fear of returning with nothing but echoes. Yet beneath the fear burned determination. I wasn't running from the Carters anymore. I was running to the woman who'd given me life. As the bus door hissed open, I stepped aboard the driver's nod, a silent blessing. My heart pounded like a drum announcing a crusade. Through the window, I watched campus fade into suburbs, then endless fields of corn waiting patiently beneath a brooding sky. I thought of Grandpa's farm, of Mama's journeys, and of Owen's fading fight for breath, and knew every mile carried me closer to the truth, and to a choice that would shape my life, to embrace the mother I'd lost, or walk away to chart a new destiny. The bus lurched forward, its wheels humming a song of passage. And with that motion, I felt the final ties to my past stretch and fray, ready to unravel in Portland's uncertain dawn. As the city of Portland emerged, spires of Douglas fir and rain-darkened streets winding toward the Willamette River, a sense of dislocation washed over me. I clutched my bag tighter, stepping onto unfamiliar ground. Neon coffee shop signs beckoned cyclists wove through traffic with calm defiance, and the air smelled of earth and possibility. I checked the address from Mama's last letter, a small brownstone in the Alberta Arts District. My pulse thrummed in time with streetcar bells as I climbed the creaky wooden steps to the front door. A brass plaque read Bennett. I raised my hand to knock, palm sticky with anticipation and dread. What if she wasn't here? What if she'd left another trail of broken promises? I pressed my fist against the door, my knuckles aching as the hinges groaned in welcome or warning. Inside, the air was warm with spices and jazz playing softly from an old turntable. Footsteps approached on hardwood floors. My breath caught. The door swung open, and for an instant time stood still, because there she was, framed by lamplight and shadow hair, now streaked with silver, but eyes undimmed. She stared at me, her hand frozen midair, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for half a century. "Evan," she whispered, voice trembling like a leaf in autumn breeze. And in that breath, I knew the next chapter, the confrontation, the forgiveness, the reunion lay waiting beyond her gaze in the delicate space between us. I froze on the threshold, the recorder clutched in my hand like a lifeline, as Mom's eyes, those same blue-gray depths I'd seen in faded photos, met mine. Rain splattered against the door's narrow window, each drop a tiny drumbeat, echoing my pounding heart. For a moment, neither of us moved. Her face was framed by soft curls, turned silver at the temples, lines at the corners of her eyes, speaking of decades I'd never known. She opened her mouth, but only a whisper came, "Evan." I swallowed, throat tight with emotion I'd buried for years. I nodded, voice thick. "It's me!" The door swung inward on a squeak. I held my breath as she stepped back, hesitating as if memory itself might crumble if she let me cross the threshold. Around us, the small brownstone hall smelled of cinnamon and old paper comfort and history tangled together. But her hand trembled as she reached to close the door. I plunged forward, raising the recorder. "Listen, please," I said, voice low but urgent. "She's here." I pressed play. Mama's voice crackled through the speaker, tender and resolute. "You are my promise to the world." At the last syllable, Mom's hand dropped from the door. She stepped aside, eyes shining with tears and fear. In that sudden silence, I realized the door had never been about keeping me out. It was about keeping her safe from her own guilt. And as I crossed the threshold, I knew we both stood on the brink of a reckoning neither of us could escape. Inside the living room felt like a sanctuary built from memories I'd only glimpsed on paper. A single strand of wind chimes tinkled by the open window, a balm against the city's roar. Mom led me to a worn armchair by a low table, scattered with letters and photographs. Mama's legacy laid out like a roadmap to my soul. Steam curled from 2 chipped mugs chamomile for her coffee for me. I sat chest tight, and she closed the door with a soft click. Outside, thunder grumbled a distant warning. I cleared my throat. Why leave me? The question felt too small, too vast all at once. She closed her eyes trembling, and the air thickened with decades of unspoken sorrow. I thought I was saving you. She began, voice barely above a whisper. But I almost lost myself. She told me of the Carter patriarch's threats, how they'd wielded their wealth to silence her, branded her a traitor to the family, a threat to their social standing. She'd watched my grandparents break under the pressure, seen her own safety vanish in legal threats and whispered rumors. And so she fled to Portland, building a career that masked her pain, but never healed it. Each word was a dagger and a caress, cutting through my anger while searing my heart with empathy. I thought of my own protest risks, of chaining myself to those doors for a cause I believed in. Yet here she'd risked exile to protect me. As her confession trailed off, the thunder rolled closer, and I realized I wasn't just hearing her story, I had to decide whether to forgive it. Across the table, her eyes searched mine, waiting for the verdict that would shape both our futures. I stood up, pacing the narrow room as raindrops slid down the pane like silent tears. The city beyond the glass pulsed with life, unknowing of our reunion's fragile unfolding. I felt that old knot in my chest tighten the weight of betrayal, the longing for family, and the conviction that truth, no matter how dangerous, was the only path forward. I came for answers, I said, voice steady, despite the storm in my veins. But I need you with me now. She looked at me, surprise flickering, before guilt washed across her features. With you? Her whisper floated on the air. I nodded. Owen's condition is critical. He's at the hospital in Council Bluffs. He's dying, and he asked me to find you. The words hit her like a blow. Her hand flew to her mouth. I lifted the recorder. He needs to hear your voice the same way I did. The tape lay between us, a bridge spanning years of silence. She swallowed hard, as if steeling herself against old fears. Outside, the thunder cracked, and at that moment, I saw her choice unfold. She could stay hidden behind her fortress of self-preservation, or she could step into the storm beside me. She rose, gathering the letters and the recorder like talismans, and said, I'll go. But if I'm walking back into that house, I need to know we're doing this together. The corners of her lips quivered into a tentative smile, and I felt a spark of something I'd thought lost hope. Yet as we hurried out into the rain, I wondered if labeling us together would hold when the Carters lay siege once more. The drive back was a blur of headlights, cutting through sheets of rain, each windshield wiper / a heartbeat counting down to confrontation. Mom sat beside me silent, clutching the recorder like a shield. I rehearsed my plan. Enter Owen's room play. Mama's voice, watch his face light with recognition, and then let the Carters answer for their sins. But every mile stoked a tempest in my gut. What if this reunion killed Owen? What if the shock of seeing her his birth mother was too much? Social media was already alight with the Carter scandal. Their names were tongues of flame in local gossip. Now we were returning to the epicenter, a mother and son armed with truth exposed as symbols of rebellion against privilege. As we neared the hospital, the sky ripped open with a final clap of thunder, and lightning cast the interstate in stark black and white. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Mom turned to me, eyes fierce. Whatever happens next, she said, we do it as a family. I drew a deep breath, the air electric with possibility and peril, and realized that facing Owen was our last act of defiance, and perhaps our first step toward redemption. Inside the hospital corridor, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I led her to Owen's room. The air smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers. I paused at his door, heart hammering so loudly I thought the nurses might hear. Mom placed a hand on my shoulder, warm, alive. I nodded and opened the door. Monitors flatlined in the dim room. Owen lay pale and fragile, a single bed rail separating him from oblivion. Mom stepped forward, cradling the recorder. I pressed play. Mama's voice filled the space between us, soft and unwavering. I promised to stand guard over you until you could stand on your own. Owen's eyelids fluttered, tears tracing clean lines down his gaunt cheeks. He reached out, voice feeble, "Mom?" The word cracked my heart like glass. She crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling beside him, and took his hand. He squeezed hers, and for a moment, the monitors seemed to hum in harmony with their reunion. But then his breathing stuttered, and the color drained from his face. Alarms began to beep urgently. I dialed frantically for the nurse, tears blurring my vision. As they rushed in, I saw my mother's face. The triumph of reunion mingled with terror at nearly losing him. I realized that even the truth's most beautiful notes can break under life's weight. The nurse's strong hands guided Mom back as they worked on Owen, and I stood frozen, torn between gratitude and fear. In that charged moment, I understood that love can demand the ultimate sacrifice, and that the next choice I made might cost me everything I'd fought to gain. The waiting room's plastic chairs felt icy beneath my palms as I sat beside Mom, both of us listening to distant beeps and footsteps. Outside, the storm had passed. Dawn's pale light filtered through rain-streaked windows. We both gazed at a small bouquet of daisies someone left on the countertop, a symbol of innocence and renewal. I could barely believe in, yet desperately needed. Minutes stretched like hours until the doctor emerged, his white coat damp with rain. He paused, gaze grave. Mom gripped my arm, knuckles tight as wire. My breath hitched. "He's stable for now," the doctor said quietly. Voice solemn, yet not without hope. "But he's frail. Rest and care will be critical." Relief and dread collided in my chest. I exhaled shakily and looked at Mom. She brushed a strand of silver hair from her face, eyes red with tears. "He made it," she whispered. "We made it." The daisies by the window caught the light, their white petals shining like a promise. Yet I knew this was only a pause in an ongoing struggle for Owen's recovery, for our family's healing, and for my own path forward amid the wreckage of old wounds. As Mom and I shared a shaky, hopeful smile, I realized that the greatest test lay ahead, not in unearthing the past, but in forging a future where love's fragile bloom could finally take root. And in that fragile dawn glow, watching Mom rest her head against my shoulder, I understood the truth I'd fought to uncover had given me something more, the chance to choose where my story would go next. But the path was still uncharted, and as the hospital's fluorescent lights faded behind us, I knew the real journey toward forgiveness, belonging, and a life built on truth was just beginning. I still carry the echo of that dawn in the hospital waiting room, Mama's daisies shining like a fragile promise at the nurse's station, as I wheeled Owen home to Portland. His breath once ragged, as autumn wind had steadied into soft rhythms, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of fear give way to cautious hope. Our tiny rented flat, with its peeling paint and single-window view of alley cats prowling under sodium lamps, became a sanctuary for 2 wounded souls seeking new roots. I cleared a corner for Owen's wheelchair next to the battered record player that crackles out Mama's folk tunes, and each evening we'd listen as the needle scratched her voice back to life. "You are my melody in the silence." In those moments, I saw the fragile power of memory to heal or to wound, and I resolved to build something stronger than secrecy, a home where our truth could grow without fear. Yet, as night settled over the city and I tucked Owen into his chair, I realized that safety was an illusion if we remained hidden from the storm we'd unleashed, because the Carter's silence still thundered in the wings, waiting to strike back. Caring for Owen brought a new resilience out of me. I learned to navigate city sidewalks littered with espresso cups and bike locks, bending over to steady his trembling hands as he sipped soup at our kitchen table. Each day I scrubbed the wheelchair's spokes and polished his glasses, until the world around us gleamed in late afternoon light, and every small victory, like the time he leaned forward to reach a mug himself, felt monumental. But strength can be both a refuge and a burden. I found myself bristling when neighbors whispered about the scandal, or when local news cameras loitered outside our block, hungry for a new angle. I had fought so hard to uncover mothers and grandmothers, to shatter gilded lies. And now I faced a paradox. Was I protecting Owen by keeping him shielded from the glare, or stifling his right to confront the world on his own terms? One afternoon, as raindrops traced silver rivulets down our windowpane, Owen turned to me with a clarity that stole my breath. "I'm stronger now, Evan. I want to be part of the story I helped start." In that quiet moment, I saw the risk laid bare. I could no longer decide for both of us where the truth belonged. So we crafted our own reckoning, a small press gathering in the courtyard of the Alberta Arts District, where the bronze statue of a torchbearer stands a symbol of enlightenment burning against ignorance. We sent invitations to local papers, to the Carter family, by certified mail, even to the university newsletter that once hailed me as a model activist. As twilight bled gold into purple, I stood beside Owen, his wheelchair bathed in lamplight, and passed him the recorder. My hands trembled when I spoke into the microphone. "This is not vengeance. This is justice for the silenced." Then he pressed play, and Mama's voice filled the courtyard, weaving through the ivy-covered walls like a hymn. I watched reporters scribble furiously, saw neighbors lean forward, and somewhere behind me, Owen's chest rose with pride rather than pain. But when we finished, a hush fell so sudden, it felt like winter's first frost. And I realized that while the world might hear our truth, it still had the power to judge, to twist our story into something dark, and I wasn't sure if I could bear the fallout. The Carters arrived at Dawn's first meeting with grim faces and a retinue of lawyers. Mark's eyes flicked between Owen's pale resolve and my steady gaze, and I sensed his grief war with his pride. Linda did not come. Claire stood behind him, shoulders squared, holding a single magnolia bloom, Mama's favorite. Its white petals, a question: could restoration bloom out of shame? Mark cleared his throat, voice brittle as glass. "We've made mistakes," he said. And for a heartbeat, I believed him. Then he added, "But a family's reputation is built over generations. You threatened to destroy ours." His words struck me like an icicle to my chest. He blamed us for unveiling their cruelty, yet refused to acknowledge how that cruelty eroded their very foundation. Claire stepped forward, voice softer but unwavering. "Reputation without integrity is a hollow shell." She pressed the magnolia into Owen's lap, and he turned its petals over in his fingertips, as if weighing forgiveness against truth. In that charged corridor, I realized that Carters were not merely adversaries, but victims of their own beliefs, and that our fight was as much for them as for ourselves. Yet the air crackled with unspoken stakes, whether they would join us in rebuilding or watch us walk away into a world that might never forgive them. After the press pack dispersed, Owen and I returned to our flat with Claire trailing behind her silhouette lit by street lamps. She carried a folded page from the Carter family journal, an entry Mama had written. "To protect him is to deny him the right to be free." She laid it on the table and said, "She always loved you more than I understood. I'm sorry." Her apology hung between us like a bridge, half-built, tremulous, yet true. I glanced at Owen, saw empathy soften his pain-worn features, and felt my own walls rattle. In that quiet room, the din of public scrutiny faded, replaced by the fragile music of reconciliation. Claire's presence, a gesture of solidarity. Owen's tentative hope. My own heart opening to a possibility I'd never dared imagine, family defined not by blood alone, but by the courage to confront darkness together. Yet as dawn edged the horizon, I knew the real test lay ahead, asking Mark and Linda, and perhaps myself, whether we could sustain this fragile peace when the world demanded black and white verdicts. A week later, we gathered at a long table in our living room, Mama's daisies in a chipped vase, old family photos taped to the wall, a single magnolia bloom at Owen's place. The table held dishes from Mama's recipes: braised greens, skillet cornbread, sweet potato pie. I watched Claire serve Mark a slice, his face unreadable as he took a bite. Linda was absent, her place marked by an empty chair and a folded napkin. I realized that forgiveness doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles in like dawn's light, coaxing shadows back. We talked through tears and half-forgotten laughter of Mama's stubborn faith in justice, of Grandpa's fiddle tunes, of our shared failures and hopes. At one point, Mark's voice cracked as he admitted he'd always equated love with control, and that his fear of scandal had blinded him to the very humanity he professed to protect. When he spoke those words, Claire's hand found his, and for a moment, the house trembled under the weight of truth-given voice. I felt a soft warmth fill my chest. This table, this imperfect family, could become a living testament to resilience. Yet in that embrace lay a question echoing louder than any apology. Could we transform these broken branches into roots strong enough to bear new growth? Tonight, as I sit by the window with the city lights glittering like scattered stars, I trace the veins of the magnolia leaf, pressed between the pages of my journal. Its white petals, now dry and delicate, symbolize both fragility and rebirth. How love can endure even the harshest storms if we choose to cultivate it. Owen sleeps in the next room, his breathing even, and I think of Mama's final promise. One day, you'll stand taller than the secrets that bind you. I feel that promise as a seed in my chest, ready to sprout into something I've never allowed myself before, a life not tethered to fear or silence, but to the courageous act of truth-telling and the hope of reconciliation. Tomorrow, I'll return to the university, to my debates and activism, bearing the scars and the wisdom this journey has granted me. I'll honor Mama by walking into every room with my head held high, unafraid of the histories I inherit or the beliefs I challenge. But tonight, as the magnolia and daisies stand vigil on my desk, I know that the final chapter isn't written yet. It's an open page waiting for our next choice, our next act of love or courage, and I can only wonder which door will dare to open next.